Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the One Talk podcast. You hear your host, Ryan McCarthy. And today we are joined by Kyla Raby. Kyla is an anti-slavery practitioner, researcher, and educator. She has worked to support survivors of modern slavery in the United Kingdom and Australia. Kyla has recently founded Everyday Slavery, which is a social media project funded by the Australian government, which aims to enable the public to play a greater role in preventing and addressing modern slavery in global supply chains and the Australian community. Today, Kyla's professional career has seen her live and work in over 20 countries. Kyla is an aid worker with the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement and has been deployed to support migration crisis in Greece and Bangladesh. She has led an earthquake recovery program in Nepal and community development projects in Kenya and Cambodia. Kyla is undertaking a PhD at the University of South Australia, exploring the role of consumers in modern slavery laws. Kyla has taught as a sessional academic for several Australian universities. And within today's episode, we touch on a lot around human trafficking, modern day slavery, Kyla's mission with everyday slavery, her work she's done with the Red Cross and working globally, also with the refugees as well. We go into so many great topics and bringing a lot of great awareness out of today's episode. In other news, if you could please leave this podcast a rating, it means so much in terms of helping getting this message out there and reaching a larger audience. It would mean so much if you leave it a rating and also leave it a follow. But without further ado, let's welcome Kyla.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all. The marathon continue. Victory lap tonight, though. Victory lap tonight.
Welcome to the One Talk podcast with Ryan McCarthy.
The marathon continues. That's what you were saying.
Welcome, Kyla. How are you?
I'm really well, thanks.
That's good. Thank you for joining us today in the One Talk podcast. I actually want to start giving like a little detailed overview about how we first met, which I feel like was not coincidental at all.
It really did feel like a universe moment, didn't it?
Yeah, it did, like how we just connected. So for the people listening, how me and Kyla first originally met, I was in Adelaide visiting my sister, and I believe you live in Adelaide and you're coming up to Brisbane for some work. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I remember, I believe I was in my moon boot at the time, and I was sitting down, and I believe you came to sit next to me to make sure like you, because your seat was arranged next to me, but I believe you're making sure that you weren't gonna like get in the way of my boot. I'm like, no, that's fine. And then we end up just talking from there, and then we started talking about the work that we do. And then from that day on, we've just connected from that 2 hour plane ride conversation to now doing a podcast together.
Yeah, it's been so lovely. And we were chatting about what we're up to, and I mentioned I'd started a social media project, and you very humbly said that you had a podcast and didn't mention how successful and popular it was. And I didn't find that out until afterwards when I stalked you on social media and was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
And it just shows like how cool it is like when you actually engage with people you've never met before, like strangers, because you never know where just one conversation can take you.
Absolutely. And it was a really great connection, and it's really lovely to be back here, and thanks for having me on the podcast.
No worries at all. I'd love to hear from your own words as well. Like, what is the line of work that you do? And if you could give us an overview just for the audience here, like what is it that you do?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm an anti-trafficking specialist. So I work in the space of human trafficking and modern slavery, and I do a number of different things. So my kind of my biggest part of my kind of work in this space so far has been as a practitioner. So I've worked for the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, or different components of the Red Cross. So the British Red Cross over in the UK and the Australian Red Cross, as well as the Greek Red Cross in northern Greece, we're working to support survivors of human trafficking, essentially. And then more recently, I've undertaken a PhD in modern slavery. So I'm a researcher now as well, and I've been involved in a lot of different research projects related to human trafficking and modern slavery. And also, I'm a teacher, so I'm an academic at University of Notre Dame. So I teach in the human trafficking and modern day slavery space as well.
Amazing. And it's like, it's really cool because I want to go into a bit more of it because I have a somewhat of an understanding from the conversations we've had. But I believe a lot of the conception of human trafficking is like the movie Taken. I think that's what people first go to when they think of human trafficking, but it's a very broad scale of things where people can be trafficked and also enforced into slavery, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually there's people that have studied this, and it's actually called the Taken effect. What the movie Taken has done to awareness around human trafficking, and in some ways, it's been fantastic because it has, raised a lot of awareness about that this exists. However, unfortunately, in some ways, it has also fueled a lot of kind of stereotypes about what human trafficking looks like, and that kind of one, picture that you see in trafficking. But the reality is, like, human trafficking and modern slavery is incredibly diverse. And it's one of the reasons that makes it really hard for people to understand it and to know what it is and to recognize it, because it comes in so many different forms. There's no one, kind of stereotypical case. Everything is really, really diverse. But I can kind of talk you through some of the primary forms of trafficking if that's of interest.
Yeah, for sure. That'll be epic.
Yeah, so I guess the terminology is a bit confusing as well. So human trafficking is a bit more of a legal term, and it has a very specific legal definition in international law, but I won't bore you with that. Modern day slavery is more of a common term that's used like to kind of as a bit of an umbrella term, to capture all of the different types of slavery. And so primarily, it kind of, you can break that concept down into like two, really big, I guess, primary forms of exploitation, and that's forced marriage and forced labor. So forced marriage, obviously, as it sounds, when somebody is forced to marry somebody else against their will. So it's really different from arranged marriage because it involves at least one of the parties not giving their full and free consent to that marriage. And then forced labor is, again, being forced to work against your will through deception or coercion or a different kind of form of control. So forced labor itself can come in, that can look in very different things. So it can be for sexual exploitation, it can be for non-sexual reasons, just purely for labor. It can be, I guess, perpetrated by private entities, so companies and businesses, or individuals, or people, connected to organised crimes groups, or it can also be perpetrated by the state, so by countries, by governments. So that's what makes it really tricky in terms of when we talk about modern slavery, it's actually referring to so many different things.
Complex, worldwide, and every country has their own jurisdiction, how they handle it, what they allow, which would make it even more complex with trying to solve it on like a global manner. Do you find that?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's why, like, a lot of us that work in this space, we do pay a lot of attention to terminology definitions, because some people think, oh, does it really matter? But actually, when you're talking about the laws and the responses that governments put in place to try and tackle these issues, it does matter about terminology and definitions and what we're talking about. But I think when we're really thinking about the humanitarian impact of these things, what all of forms of human exploitation have in common is that they're really harmful. They're breaches of human rights, and they cause very long-term impacts on the people that are affected by them. So I think that's kind of the core of human exploitation. It's just really serious harm.
Yeah, 100%. Because I know a guy that used to work for Destiny Rescue, I believe it's called, which is international for children. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not
and
too
it,
familiar with them.
yeah, and he said that was for more like trafficking of younger people. And one thing he found was that even though the whole consensus of everyone's knowing was that this thing was wrong, but his ability and what he was allowed to do within his role was restricted depending on the countries he would go to, because he had to follow the rules and laws and go through the processes. And I think that would also make it hard, especially if you come from like Australia, like me and you, and try and go overseas and trying to implement our own tactics over there and trying to help other countries and become more tricky. So do you find this more so focusing on the spot you're in and then creating the change there, and then letting other people in other countries do their own thing. Is what I'm saying making sense at the moment?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. I think, although I hear you, I think in my work, one of the things that I feel is really important is having like the overall frameworks, to encourage governments to take action on these issues, and those frameworks usually come from like international law or international agreements. So even things like the United Nations Global Sustainable Development Goals, so the SDGs, which are like, goals about what the world agreed to, aiming towards by 2030, so only 6 more years away. There's a goal there about eliminating modern slavery. And that's really key because I guess it sets a clear target, and it encourages states to take action. And it's not saying one, it's not really dictating exactly what states have to do, but I guess it's without those types of frameworks, I think it is it's more concerning that we won't take action. I mean, unfortunately, it's very unrealistic that modern day slavery can be eliminated in the next 6 years. So I think it's pretty fair to say that that goal is not going to be reached. But there's other frameworks and targets, and that I think really do encourage that collective action at a state level. And then that's talking about government action. But I also think there's heaps that businesses as well can do, and that consumers can do at every different layer of society. And there's other frameworks that exist to encourage businesses to take more action. And the work that I've been doing, I guess, in my research in my PhD is about consumers as well. What can everyday Australians and everyday people, do in terms of our purchasing decisions to help try and tackle this issue? So there is consensus that it's a very complex and global problem that requires everybody involved in the solution.
I love how you touched there on the consumer part as well, because if we stop funding in the sense where these things are coming from, there's not going to be a market for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why I first started looking at consumers in my research, because I was really excited by the idea of, exactly what you said. If we stop purchasing things, there's a chance that there's no market for it. But I guess I'm a couple of years into my PhD now, and I've really flipped my thinking on that, because I feel that is actually, it's really putting an unfair burden on consumers, because you look at even in a country like Australia, where we're so lucky and we're so fortunate to have a public healthcare system, and to have a welfare system, and to have an incredibly wealthy state country compared to many countries around the world. And we still have a cost of living crisis on our hands right now, where people can't afford to put food on the table and are making horrific decisions over, what they need to prioritize in order to keep, a roof over their head. Rents have gone up, et cetera, et cetera. So I think kind of putting the responsibility on consumers to, choose to buy things differently when they have so many products at their fingertips that, are, $3 or $4, much cheaper, I guess, than could be made ethically. I feel like it is actually quite unfair, even though I, at the same time, feel that consumers can make a lot of difference by choosing differently in terms of their purchasing power. But I think the real value in consumers making those different decisions is actually telling companies you need to change, and it's putting the pressure back on companies, because it's multinational corporations that are making billions of dollars of profit out of slave labor. So that's also one of the reasons why I'm a big advocate for strong government regulation and laws, because I think it's the ones that are profiting from exploitation which should be held accountable. And there is certainly an argument that as consumers we're getting the benefit from exploitation. But I think we're quite a few steps removed from that. We're not actually, making the decisions that are causing those people to be in a situation of slavery.
That's a great point, because there's so many factors in the day-to-day life which determines our decisions that we make. Like an example, one is inflation. Like if someone has to feed their family and look after their own, and they have no external funds and they're getting hit with inflation, like where else are they meant to go? Because the whole topic overall. It's not as black and white as you may think. And when you said earlier on, there's a 6 year plan. A lot of people think that some things can change very quickly, but it's not the case. It usually does take 5, 10, 15 years, maybe 20, maybe even the whole generation to really
Yeah.
kickstart a new way of living.
Absolutely. And I think what's really important about modern slavery is that often it's talked about as something that kind of is quite extreme, like going back to the Taken example, that, it happens by organized crime groups, and only, only gangsters and mobbed people. But actually, and of course that does happen. It is a part of, human exploitation. But the majority of people in the world that are experiencing modern slavery are enslaved through private enterprises in forced labor in global supply chains. So that is businesses. And it's not, the one-off rogue business. It is the major multinational corporations that we, that buy and sell the products that we use every day. And it is also, it's not something that just happens as an abnormality. It's been built into the whole system of global production, and the whole system of capitalism, and the whole system of the way that, global supply chains work. It's actually been embedded in that as a way of functioning. So in order to prevent it, it's going to take a, really fundamental change to kind of change that whole system. And I think that's the part that simultaneously inspires me, but also makes me feel a bit down when I really think about it,
Yeah.
because it is. But I think it's really important that people understand that, because too often, I think if we think of it as something that is just facilitated by, this more of a, I guess, evil enterprise or evil person, it kind of removes accountability from the more mainstream businesses and players that are responsible.
100%. Because I saw a video online. There's this guy that snuck into the Congo with a camera, because 70%, I believe the number was 70% of phones, computers, all technological items, um, the mine from Colbert, and the workers are actually enslaved in the Congo. And seeing the
Yeah,
videos of
absolutely.
what's actually happening over there is really sad. And because I believe the number is like estimated over 50 million people globally that are
Yeah.
in modern day slavery, and then seeing just a little chunk of it in the Congo happening, but knowing that this is happening globally, like you
Yeah.
said, it can be one of those things where it does sadden you knowing the information, but it also can inspire you to make the change too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. DRC and Cobalt is a really good example of, something that touches our lives every day. It's in our phones, it's in our laptops, and it's also a really difficult product as a consumer to make a different choice on, because, we live with smartphones, and unfortunately it's a product in almost every smartphone. So it's hard to have a slavery-free smartphone, for example. But that's why, going back to what I was saying before, I think it's around regulation and international frameworks that encourage, um, accountability for businesses who are sourcing that cobalt, to ensure that they're not, enslaving people, and child labour is a really big issue in that industry as well.
So, like you said, instead of putting all the focus on the consumer, instead focus back on the people actually doing this work and set more regulations around what they're actually doing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so. I run a social media project called Everyday Slavery, and where I'm trying to raise awareness with the Australian public as consumers, but also as what we call global citizens. Just as everyday people who care about about humanity, about the world. And I think that's where, if you are, if you do consider yourself a global citizen and you do care about humanity, what you can do, to try and help this issue is to communicate that back to government and say, this is really important. Like, as an Australian, I think the Australian government should be making, should be encouraging stronger regulation in this area. And Australia does pretty well. We're one of the world leaders in this space, but there's still so much more that could be done. Unfortunately, those estimates that you mentioned. So in 2021, it was estimated that there's over 50 million people in the world in modern slavery. And that was up significantly, I think about 10,000, 10 million again, my apologies, 10 million more than estimates that were undertaken 5 years earlier in 2016. So the issue is just growing and rapidly growing. And so, government responses need to be, I think, as aggressive as that to try and, have any impact.
Yeah, well, that's like close to 3 times the population of Australia.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. When you put it that way, it's pretty crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. And like this question came into my head, and I'm not sure if it actually will be anything, but I'm keen to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah.
With the future looking like there's going to be a lot of AI, artificial intelligence, and whatnot, do you think that will create a decrease in slavery because computer and technology will become the rise and take over a lot of the things that I guess slavery does at the moment? Or do you think it'll still maybe the same, but slavery will get used in a different context?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Look, I think unfortunately, I think slavery will always be part of human civilization. And that I guess I don't mean that to put it down on anyone listening, but I think I feel that way because I guess I've done quite a bit of thinking about this issue over the years. And actually, one of my colleagues and I have just published a book on modern slavery in Australia, and we looked at the history of slavery globally and in Australia. And it's been part of human civilization since the beginning. So that, there's kind of evidence that some form of slavery existed, ever since humans have. So I don't think that, unfortunately, we'll have a chance of changing that. But I do think that that shouldn't be a reason not to try, and definitely not to try to reduce it. But going back to your specific point around AI, that's a really interesting one. I know that unfortunately what we've seen so far with AI is that there always has to be a human element to some technology, and sometimes that role that humans can play can also be, really challenging or difficult. So in the case of ChatGPT, there has been allegations of the company that they outsourced a lot of the data. Data. Sorry, I'm not an IT person, but it was called like sifting through the
Yeah.
images that or the responses that it gives to check for I guess sexually explicit content that was outsourced to a company in Kenya, and involved workers sitting for 13, 14 hours a day looking at really horrific content, and experiencing kind of post-traumatic distress and a lot of trauma from doing that, and also getting paid next to nothing, and in really difficult working conditions. So we saw this incredible advancement in AI, but there was a real human cost there. So I fear that will probably be a part of development in the technological space. And similar with another form of slavery that's just really kind of starting to um, grow. It's considered like the fastest growing type of modern slavery at the moment is called forced scamming, and it's where literally the people that are texting you saying, "Hey Ryan, would you like to your unpaid bill, click on this link and you pay this bill or this toll or something that you owe." um, Unfortunately, some of the time, those people that are doing that are actually in a situation of modern slavery, because these slave kind of centres have been established in many countries. Cambodia is one of them that's are really growing, where people are deceptively recruited to work in them and then held against their will and forced to scam people in wealthy countries like Australia. So, I mean, that's not AI, but I guess I'm just thinking about technology, and the advancements in technology we see, unfortunately, has always come with an element of human exploitation.
There's two separate things I want to touch on from that, because you're opening so many new sparks in my mind. It's good. It's got me thinking. You bring a lot of great awareness here. But I guess it makes sense what you're touching about around AI, because the more AI becomes more prevalent in the world, the more computers, phones, the more technological things we're going to need, and the more cobalt we're going to need. So more
Yeah.
mining is going to happen, more forced labor is going to happen in return, and that. So when you said, I don't think it will stop it, just maybe used in a different sense, that completely makes sense as well. And also the point around forced scamming. And I think I'm really glad you touched on that because I never thought about it in that light, because I literally got a text yesterday from a toll saying I need to pay a toll. But like
How did I know?
yeah, but like the first thing you think of is like, oh, someone's trying to scam me, this person's evil. But instead, that person could be a victim that's actually doing this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've seen some really great media reporting on this lately. So it's good that some of the Australian media is picking up on this, because I know it's obviously horrifically annoying to Australians, and can be really devastating to Australians who unfortunately are scammed and lose money and as a result. But there is absolutely this other side to it that uh, there's a likelihood, quite a high likelihood, that the people are doing that are in a situation where they've lost their freedom. So, and we know that the people that are being recruited to these forced scamming centres, generally they're quite well educated. You know, they have IT degrees or some form of IT abilities, and they're recruited to what they think is going to be a great job opportunity, with good pay, and they're recruited from different countries, so they're migrant workers when they travel overseas to take up this opportunity, and then they are kind of forced and held against their will and trapped essentially in these situations. So it's really horrific, and I think it's always good to remember that if you're on the receiving end now, if you're listening to this and you're not aware, next time you get one of those messages, have a think about who might be sending it.
Hmm. Feel like I want to touch on the personal note here for yourself, like doing this work, doing all the research, knowing what you know and seeing what you've seen. Like, how do you cope yourself with doing the type of work that you do? Like, how do you regulate your own emotions?
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. um, Look, I think for me, the the thing that keeps me going with this work is that the people that I've had the chance to work with and meet. So as a practitioner working in this space, I've done a lot of work with survivors of human trafficking, and although they have had sometimes the most horrific things happen to them that you could not even imagine, they are just these incredibly resilient and wonderful human beings, and I think that's given me a lot of faith in the human spirit. So even though it's kind of the worst of humanity in one way, obviously in terms of the perpetrators, but you also get to see the best of humanity. You get to see the strength of the human spirit, and you can see how someone can turn their life around when they have the right supports in place, and they are able to kind of, one, free themselves from the situations that they're in, but to also be appropriately supported to recover and to move on in life and to go on and fulfill their dreams. That's just so exciting to see that happen, and that's just it's very motivating. So I think that's what I really love about my work in the practice space, and I think that's also driven my work in the research space. So all my research has a very practical focus. I always I'm a big believer in trying to change policy or laws to strengthen and improve it for survivors. And same as my teaching now, I try to really encourage people to think about the real practical implications of what they're learning and how to apply that to the real world to be able to try and make change. So I think it's the size of the issue means that I'm continuously motivated to be able to create change in some ways, but it definitely does come at times where it can become a bit overwhelming. And throughout my career today, I've always just had like little outlets and chances to take a step away and have a break and do something slightly different. I have kind of tried my hand at a few other types of roles, but it's only ever been temporary, and I've come back to this work because I do absolutely love it, and it's where my passion is. But every now and then you just need to have a break and step away and do something a little bit differently.
Yeah, because it can be quite rewarding by the sounds of it. Like, even though it can be an intense job with the type of work it is, but also seeing the changes people can make within their own lives and seeing the results of that can be really rewarding.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's so rewarding. And I think that's definitely what drives it. in the Australian space, we've had some really amazing wins, I guess, in the last few years. We've been able to create some change, some really significant policy change, and that's been really rewarding as well. So being able to kind of work incredibly hard for a certain advocacy objective or something, and then to get that across the line and get something changed, knowing that that's going to have a really big impact on a number of survivors and strengthen support systems and responses, etc. That's pretty exciting and definitely keeps you going.
Yeah, 100%. And also like adds into the motivation factor as well, because you're constantly working towards outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I also, over the years, I've taken up a range of different self-care strategies. I became a runner and I started running marathons, which I definitely was not a runner. So I did one for the British Red Cross in England when I was living there, the London Marathon, which was my first, and it was just like the most amazing experience. And then I ran the Athens Marathon when I was living and working in Greece, and I ran the Melbourne Marathon a few years ago when I was back in Australia working for the Australian Red Cross. And so I've always kind of found little outlets that are connected to my work, but also, kind of involve self-care. Like running definitely was a strategy for a long time for me. Definitely not recently. I think I'm a retired runner, but it was a great strategy for a number of years.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's good being able to find something that truly works for you, help you process, you can continue on the path that you want to stay on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm someone that can't sit still. So I've had so many people say to me over the years, "Have you tried yoga?" And I'm like, "Oh, yoga is my living hell. Like I just cannot do it." And I don't. So once when someone said, "Oh, look, meditation can involve like movement as well," and I realized I'm like, "Oh, running. This is my meditation." So
Yeah.
yeah.
So that is like a misconception, because I always thought that was meditation too. I'm like, I can't sit there for like an hour chilling. So now I take the dogs for a walk, and like that's my form of
Oh,
meditating now.
it's so good, isn't it? I think moving your body. I love your what you do in your socials about how you moved your body today. I think that's fantastic because you can just make so much difference to your mental health.
Yeah, that's why I love it, because like even though you have a few days off per week from the gym or exercise, I still think it's important to at least go for a walk or move your body in some shape or form every single day, because it has a good effect on the physical, but also the mental as well. It's like an overall impact that it can have.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm also a big believer of doing that in nature as much as possible. Like unfortunately, we live in suburbia, so it's hard to kind of get out sometimes. But like I went for a hike with my good girlfriend the other day, and we've both got young babies, so we had them strapped to us, and we were kind of just walking in the national park, and we were like, oh, this is magical. Just being in nature, you realize like how soothing it is for the soul.
It's like you can really disconnect.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
When
Which is
you Yeah, 100%. It's super important. 'Cause it feels like when we have to disconnect to reconnect back to ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also just like to give you that chance to process what's happened or what's going through your head, or to check in with yourself, because in busy life you can kind of just go from one thing to the next without doing that checking in. And I think that's how we burn out, or we become unaware of what's going on for ourselves, and it gets too much.
Especially we have kids, we have a job, if we study, like there's so many different factors that go on the day to day that we have to process. And think about how many times that we actually give ourselves time to process thoughts and emotions and information. Especially now we live in a time with mobile phones where at the
Mm.
slightest chance of distraction, usually most people will go towards it. And that's why I love just going to the bush or going to the beach and just doing something where you're really tapping out.
Yeah, yeah. No, I completely agree. I've got two little kids, two kids under two, and they're a really great actual reminder to be present and to stay in the moment. And we're my partner and I try and really hard not to do screen time or introduce any screens to them. So we're trying to be conscious ourselves in front of them and not be on our screens. And it's amazing because it helps you. Today I just sat there for a good half an hour with my daughter on my lap, just talking to her and playing with her. And I was like, yeah, that checking in, that getting into the moment and just living in it is I feel like unfortunately in our generation, the screens have taken up so much of that like little downtime or that in between time. It's now replaced with like scrolling or doing something. So you don't get that I guess the ability to just sit and be or be with the people around you. So trying to reverse a little bit of that.
Like at the moment, I don't have kids, but it's a massive goal of mine to become a father. And I believe a lot of the work that I do now is because I know my kids and the generations after me are going to live in the world that we are living in now. So I really want to try and do the best I can to try and leave the world in a better place. Do you think that what helps motivate you as well, knowing that your children are going to be and like they're going to be after the work that you do and maybe the positive impact that you leave on the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I've been motivated for this work way before I had kids, but now having kids, it's kind of added this whole different dimension to it. It has made the work harder, I think, and I'm fortunate at the moment. I'm on maternity leave from my kind of day job, which is the real practice space where I work quite closely, with survivors. And I think I'm fortunate that I've got a bit of time and space away from that at the moment because I found as a parent, I'm just this highly emotional, person. I can't watch it sometimes a TV commercial without crying. And I think, okay, I'm not sure, how I'm going to reconcile, the fears that you have as a parent now with about the world with my kind of practice-based work, but doing the research and the teaching, you're one more step removed. So I guess it's a little bit easier in that sense. But I think you're right, like having that the motivation to keep going and doing the work because we want to leave the planet in a better condition. And I think so much of the stuff that's happening in the climate movement is so inspirational because we know that that change needs to happen now. Otherwise, our kids really will see, a completely different lifestyle that we have had and our parents have had. So, yeah, trying to keep that at the heart and soul.
That's why I love like the whole social media online presence because like your children in the future will be able to go to everyday slavery and see like a journey of your work over the years, or my kids will be able to go to the One Talk podcast and listen for the episode over the years. And I think it's such a cool idea knowing that our children have that access to us because imagine over our parents, we were able to be like, oh, my dad had this Instagram page. Let me scroll down and see what he was up to.
It's so cool, isn't it? Although it makes me think, like, what are they going to have instead of Instagram? Like for Christmas, I got a record player, and so I've been playing my daughter records, and it's just like the most amazing thing, and like having this kind of little bit of retro in our lives. And I was thinking the other day, I was like, by the time she's old enough for me to have a conversation with her about like and to fully understand like the history of music, what's it gonna be like? Spotify is probably going to be replaced by something, but we don't know. And I think surely this social media generation like it has an endpoint, doesn't it? It's got to evolve into something, but I have no idea what.
They'll end up having like an AI DJ just in the kitchen or something.
No, Ryan, I remember when I met your partner because your partner was with you on the plane ride when we met. I remember you both talked about wanting to have kids, and I thought, oh, like you could just see from even knowing you for half an hour, how passionate you both were about that. And I think you guys would be incredible parents. So,
Oh, thank you for that.
No, you're welcome. I recommend it. It's highly stressful, but amazing at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. Because like, yeah, I see my sister. Ever since my sister had kids, I think that's when I really was like, yeah, I want children now. Like just having nieces and nephews of my own. And I'm like, yeah, I'm keen to like just start a family, and then have that going for generations and have grandkids in the future.
That's awesome. It's great that you've also seen the reality of it too through your sister, so you know that it's not all smooth sailing, but yeah, definitely worth it.
I just want to quickly go back to you said you worked in London. Were you
Yeah.
working in the same line of work as you're doing now? Was it slavery and human trafficking in London as well?
Yeah, so it was actually I wasn't actually in London, sorry, I was in the East Midlands in the UK. So I
Oh
was
yeah.
based in Nottingham and I was working for the British Red Cross, and I had kind of responsibility for the whole of the East Midlands and over into like Cheshire and over yeah, so kind of that middle part. I don't know exactly what you what you described that as, but I was responsible for programs that were primarily supporting refugees and asylum seekers, as well as a little bit of other kind of work in the emergency response and kind of first aid space. And as a result, like we actually, when I first started that job, we didn't have any specific human trafficking programs, but it was back in 2014, at the end of 2014 and the beginning of 2015. So that was a period where there was mass migration coming into the UK because of the Syrian conflict and what was labelled the European refugee crisis, where there was literally 1 million or so people moving across Europe seeking asylum and seeking refuge. And through that, all this extra kind of migration to UK, unfortunately, there was a really, a sharp increase in human trafficking. And so in the area that I was working around, like Derby and around Nottingham, we were seeing a lot of people being trafficked, and there wasn't support services there to help them, or there wasn't like kind of the ones that they needed or the ones that were appropriate for them. So we started, I guess, designing and implementing services in response to that. And that's how I first got involved in human trafficking, was just by that kind of pure coincidental need. Then it's kind of just going from that, I guess, in terms of my next steps in career.
Like at that time in the UK, was there any important events that happened or information that you received in that time that really stuck with you till today? Like that carries on with the line of work you do today?
Yeah. I think for me, I remember this one day as so clearly. And I don't know if your listeners or you will remember that exact period, but there was a turning point in that kind of crisis. And up until this day, really, there'd been quite a lot of negativity towards refugees and asylum seekers in the UK, just like there has been, I guess, in Australia for the last decade or two, often fueled by politics. And it's, unfortunately, refugees have been, a political football in so many sense. And what the refugee crisis did in Europe was change a bit of that. So there was a photo of a young boy, a 2-year-old boy who died and drowned, and he was laying on the beach in Turkey, and that photo went viral. So he was wearing red t-shirt, I think, or red shorts, and so some of your listeners may remember it. And what that did was just show, I guess, the human impact of this issue, and show that this is actually humans' lives. These are young kids, and obviously, as a parent, you would not get onto a boat with a young child and put their life in danger unless that was your, best option for a future for them, or your only option for a future for them. So I think it really kind of changed the narrative and changed the public perception of refugees. And the day that I specifically remember was I was kind of just in the office, and I answered the phone, and it was just a member of the public saying, we know you work with refugees, what can we do to help? And I was just kind of just like sitting there in shock, being like, whoa, this is not the calls that we're kind of used to getting. So and that, I just remember that being a bit of a turning point. So I think for me, what's always stuck with me is that you do need the public to have awareness of the issue and to understand it and to be on board in order to create the change that you need. And that's why I feel really passionate about the public awareness kind of raising, and why I'm running the social media project, because just as back then with a slightly different topic, although there's so much interconnection between human trafficking and migration, still you need that public awareness in order to kind of get the political will sometimes to make the change that you need, and to support the NGOs and the civil society organisations that are doing a lot of the great work, to help the people that are being impacted.
That makes sense, because the society, they create the culture, and I believe us as humans, we have a very tribal mindset. So what is currently accepted in the world is set by the people that live in it, but the awareness comes out into the world, and we start opening up more minds and bringing more awareness and getting people to have more of an understanding. Because I'm originally from England. I'm from Liverpool, and I remember around that time when I was younger, around the refugees and the hostility around that. But as I was growing up, I always thought exactly what you said just then about these people are coming because they feel like this place is their best option, or that their only chance, or for their future kids. And to be able to think of it in that light, I feel like we can have a lot more empathy for people and also find
Mhm.
ways to want to help.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There was a really powerful TV show in Australia about a decade ago called uh, Go Back to Where You Came From, where I think it was the SBS that did it, and they took like six Australians who had, I think, quite negative views against asylum seekers, and they took them on the journey, literally back the way through the kind of route that an asylum seeker would sometimes take to get to Australia, and where they ended up in often refugee camps or the place of origin of people who do seek asylum, and the way that just they're seeing how they change their perspective so much by just being able to understand what someone was going through. And I don't think you need to even do that these days. There's so much that you can read, you can hear about, you can learn to be able to understand, to try and put yourself in someone else's shoes. But I think honestly, human empathy is the potential solution for so many of our world problems. It's just being able to understand what somebody else might be going through, or to try to. Obviously, you couldn't potentially comprehend it, but just to try to understand that there is, so much going on for someone in particular circumstances. I think if we could do that better, we would be in a better place, I think, in the world.
There's so many stories as well, because the UFC heavyweight champion of the world is Francis Ngannou, and he's originally from Cameroon, and he was attempting to leave Cameroon and get to Europe for a better life and to try and make something out of his life. And his journey to get from Cameroon to France, I believe it was, took about 6 to 9 months. And he had to go through the Sahara Desert on 6 separate occasions by foot. And like, just there's so much more detail into the story. But for people wanting to listen to Francis's story around him seeking refuge into another country, it's just on the Joe Rogan podcast, Francis Ngannou episode. But it'll just give you a bit of an insight of like what majority of these people go through just to live a better life. And I'm sitting there now, like, with just so much gratitude that I get to live in a place like Australia, and I don't have to go and seek refuge to other countries. But knowing that there's people out there that are wanting to come, it just shows that there is a need for more
Yeah.
support for people and more resources to help these people in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just a more fair and equal world. There's so much, inequality. And I think the thing that I look at in my career to date, the kind of theme that has been the same, whether I'm working in human trafficking or in refugees and asylum seekers, and I've also done, some work in other fields as well, is inequality. So there's always been inequality there. And I think that's what, like, the strive for equality is kind of what drives me, because um, um, yeah, we are so lucky in Australia in so many ways, and so many, like, one of my first experiences as a young person, I was 19 years old, when I had the opportunity to go to Africa for the first time and to go and work in Uganda. And that's what, seeing the situation that were many people were living, especially I was working in a really rural community, with no running water, no electricity, etc. That kind of was a foundational experience for me, and came back and drove a lot of the decisions I made around study and work after that.
I actually just interviewed a fellow from Uganda last week. So
It's such a great country. I
yeah,
really wish I could get back there.
yeah, he owns a silverback trekking safari. Did you do any of that when you were over there?
No, unfortunately, I was like 19 and a student and completely broke, and it's quite expensive, but understandably, it should be. But no, I couldn't afford it, unfortunately. I would love to go and do that now, though. Such an incredible experience to get up close to the gorillas. No,
Gorillas,
sorry,
yeah.
yeah, gorillas, of course.
I know a lot of people say when they travel, and I know I relate with this, is that it teaches you so much about life. What do you feel like you've learned from traveling?
Whew, so many things. That that no matter how different humans are, we're connected by being human. I think, you can go to places that you don't speak the language, you know, everything looks foreign, feels foreign, and you can still meet someone who you can connect with even without speaking, words that you each understand. Like you can understand gestures, you can understand smiles, you can understand body language, and you can connect and find a way to, communicate in just by being human. And I think, um, that also what drives, what I was just saying around my passion for addressing inequalities, because I really truly believe that one human life is not more valuable than the other, and that all human lives are just as valuable as each other, and we should, everything that we try to do, everything that we do in life should kind of encapsulate that. But unfortunately, it really doesn't. And there's so much inequality and power imbalance, and in the systems and structures that obviously that society functions on.
And there's so many beautiful things that can happen if humans actually come together and work together from
Yeah,
different nations, cultures, backgrounds. And like you said, like even if you don't speak the same language as someone else, there's still ways to communicate needs or wants, and you can support each other. Like an example I can give is not really too extraordinary, but when I was in south of Italy last year, I was going to a coffee shop and I asked a lady for an iced latte. And she looked at me like I was like a bit crazy. She goes, "Iced latte, what does that mean?" And I was like trying to explain to her cold coffee. And then she looked at me and she goes, "Cold coffee, what do you mean?" So I got I got a photo online and I was like, coffee, milk, ice. And then she's like, "I'll make it for you." But she's like, "I never made one before." And she made it for me. And I believe she ended up making herself one as well just to try it. But everyone was looking at me like I was crazy. But at the end of the day, she understood what I wanted and also supported me in getting that as well, just
did
by
she, did she
trying.
like it? What did she think of it? Did she
I think,
try?
yeah, I think she looked at me like a weirdo. Because when I was over there, everyone was drinking espressos. So I think to drink a cold coffee was a bit strange. And it was winter over there too, because I went there in February.
It's probably like, very culturally offensive to put like ice in coffee.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like starting to feel guilty.
No, no, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? How people kind of will go out of their way as well to try and expand their horizons and take on board new things.
Yeah, that's why I love Australian culture. That's one of the first things I noticed when I moved here was like how easily someone's willing to take the shit off their own back to help someone else.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, that's great to hear. As from someone who's moved to Australia, I'm glad that's been your experience.
Yeah. Like for the people listening here and hearing all this information and getting all this awareness and they want to become more aware or they want to try and become more aware and their decisions they are making, like what's some of the things they can look out for? Let's just do an example of products they buy. So maybe food and drinks. Like what's some of the key things they can look out for?
Yeah, sure. So, we've just had Easter. What's still for you and I right now. So we're recording this on Easter Monday. But I don't know about you. There's a lot of chocolate in my house from this weekend. And chocolate is one of a really high a product that's considered a high risk of being made with modern slavery because of the cocoa bean. That obviously is a key ingredient in chocolate as well as coffee. And so there's a although there's a risk that modern slavery could be in almost everything that we kind of use and consume. My suggestion would be to think about the really high risk products, and there's a lot of information out there about what are those high risk products. And you've obviously talked about cobalt being an ingredient in phones. Sorry. An ingredient, a part of phones, and there's other things like seafood is an industry that has a lot of high risks of modern slavery. So for those types of products, there's actually been some really amazing work done by a lot of civil society organizations that help consumers understand what what they could buy in terms of how to make more ethical choices. So, for example, Be Slavery Free are one of the organisations I work really closely with. They're an Australian NGO and they've done some amazing work over the years, and they've got something called a chocolate scorecard. And you can look up, your favourite brand or your favourite type of chocolate and see where the company scores. And it's so helpful. And that's kind of how I, tried to buy my chocolate this year for Easter. And there's other things like apps, especially in the fashion industry. So clothing is another really high risk product, because cotton farming is unfortunately, commonly involves slave labor, and even just the production of garments as well, like the sewing and putting them together is often involved in modern slavery. So there's some great organisations that have done work around ranking brands on their ethical sustainability, and a lot of those kinds of assessments of companies don't just look at modern slavery, but they also look at things like environmental impact. So the chocolate scorecard looks at the use of pesticides and things like that, that companies do, and some of the fashion apps look at obviously things around water and sustainability from that sense as well. So I would recommend, if you're interested, to check out some of those tools. You can also follow Everyday Slavery, so to make a little pitch, and because that's, I guess, some of the stuff that I'm sharing on those social media channels, trying to encourage people just to understand what those high risk products are, and to be able to feel more confident in making some decisions around how they want to potentially shop more ethically.
I highly recommend following Everyday Slavery.
Thank you.
But
Thanks,
like when you receive that phone call when you're in the UK with the person wants to find out how they can contribute or help with a refuge, let's put this into the listeners here that want to also create the change or be the change with human trafficking and modern day slavery. Like, how can, I guess, the people that want to create a change or create awareness, like what's some of the things that we could do, or what's maybe some of the things that we could maybe it's petitions, maybe it's speaking or writing letters, maybe it's bringing awareness on social media, whatever it may be. What do you think would be some of the great things that we could do to really create a positive change around all this?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. I think a lot of what you've just mentioned, but in a couple of steps, I think the first thing is to better understand the issue. So if you do want to make some change, understand, like research and do a bit of reading and understand like those high risk products, but also some of the indicators of modern slavery in our own community, because it absolutely happens here in Australia. The program that I work for, the program that I manage at the Australian Red Cross, is support survivors of modern slavery. Survivors of modern slavery here in Australia. So it's not just something that happens overseas, and you may be able to see it in your own community and be someone who can actually help someone out of a situation of slavery. So really, just gaining a better understanding of the issues is definitely the first step. As I say, as a consumer, but also as a global citizen, someone who just cares about humanity. And then, once you have that awareness and that understanding, I would say there's kind of two primary streams of action that you can take. One of them is through your purchasing decisions. So thinking about what you can buy that's more ethical, and supporting companies that are doing the right thing and encouraging that, but also communicating to the companies that are not doing the right thing, or if you're not sure, telling the companies that you purchase from. So if you have favorite brands or favorite things, websites that you like to buy from, asking them questions, telling them this is important to you, you want them to be taking steps to address modern slavery, because that communication to the businesses is so important. And if everybody did that, who did care, who was interested in and wanting this topic to change, then we would have an avalanche of support, and it would be very difficult for businesses to ignore that. So I think that's definitely one stream. And then the other side is, I think, that conversation back to government, and that communicating back to your local MPs that this is an issue that you're really really passionate about and want to see change. And there's organisations, again, like Be Slavery Free, the one I mentioned earlier, that have a lot of templates that make it super easy for you to just kind of fill it in and send it off to your MP, so you don't have to sit there and spend a long time articulating different things. But if you want to do that as well, that's really impactful, like actually writing an original email to your local MP. It's unbelievable how much that does actually make a difference. I know if you've never done that before, you might think, oh, really, is one email going to change things? But there's policies in place in a lot of jurisdictions where MPs have to respond to their constituents. So they have, a responsibility to do that. So whether it's them or someone in their office actually has to read what you have to say, and take that on board and make a response. And so it can be, I guess, really, if enough people do it, it can be really impactful. And that's why we've been able to create policies in this space that are tackling issues, because of that public support and interest. So I think, does that answer your question? Sorry, there's a lot there.
100%. Yep. That answers my question. I love how you touched on the fact that don't think you're just one voice that may not get heard, because you can be a part of the change. Then once one person sees one person speaking up about it, it can inspire the next person, and it can create so much of a ripple effect just from one person opening up and starting the conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you've never engaged with government before, like if you've never, spoken to your MP or anything like that, I would encourage you to do that, even if it's not obviously on the issue that I'm talking to you about, modern slavery, but on any issue that you're passionate about, because, in a democracy like we live in, government is there to represent us. And I know a lot of young people, and a lot of people in general, not just young people, are becoming really disillusioned by government because of, I guess, so much horrific stuff that we've seen governments do, in particular over the last decade, which is understandable. But our systems require citizens to engage in them, and that, I think, is the biggest potential for governments to be accountable is through active citizenships. And if citizens are passive and we kind of just let politics do its thing, then there's a real danger, I think. So it's really important to I guess make your voice heard, and it will count. I absolutely guarantee that. Even if it doesn't feel like it sometimes, like every single email to an MP, I think, I believe anyway, personally, makes a difference.
100%. Every step matters. Every step matters.
Yeah.
Before we finish up here, I just want to give you the stage for a moment. Maybe it's to tell people where to find you at. Maybe you got a message you want to share with the audience here, but do you have anything that you'd like to share before we finish? I just want to give you the opportunity.
Thanks so much. I would just say, don't be, I would say, try not to be discouraged by the scale of this issue and how horrific it is, because those things are, obviously really confronting. And, when you do start to learn more about modern slavery as well, the techniques that are used to enslave people are horrific. And there's a lot of, really hard realities about situations of human trafficking and modern slavery. But I would really encourage people to not stray away from engagement in this space because of those things. And I guess, like I shared earlier, to remember that whenever that occurs, there is also a human at the end of that, and that human really deserves the world to care about that, and deserves, I guess, support and protection. And that's not going to happen unless people do care. And so it might be easier to kind of say, oh, this is not the issue that I'm going to be concerned about, or to, I guess, turn a bit of a blind eye and think, oh, it's not me that's causing that, or I'm just going to buy this thing because it's available to me, or whatever, because it's a little bit easier, especially in a world where we have so many other issues competing for our attention. I totally understand that can be, the easiest route and what a lot of people would like to take, but I would really try to encourage you not to do that, and to engage in the space and to learn more and to take those actions that we were just talking about, because I think the human beings that are impacted by this issue deserve that, because everybody deserves freedom, and everybody, deserves, to live a free life. And at the heart of human trafficking is the removal of that freedom.
Amen. Kyla, thank you for jumping on.
Thanks so much for having me, Ryan. I really appreciate it.